Linda, let's start with you. I mean, on the face of it, it doesn't look like China's doing very much. We can't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But why do you think that is?
I think China's always preferred the status quo, but as you've seen from all the announcements from President Trump to Nikki Haley, his ambassador to the UN, the status quo is not good enough for America. And seeing the last nuclear missile that North Korea has launched, which has 5 times the impact, I believe, of Hiroshima, I think this is obviously something which the Chinese will be pushed to do something more. But I think the big question with all of this is, what is that something more? And can President Trump really deliver his threat to cut off all trade with countries that do business with North Korea? I looked this up, Ian. 107 countries export to North Korea.
Goodness.
And China, obviously, is the biggest one, 90% of North Korean trade. And the U.S. is 47th, and cutting off trade with 107 countries. I'm sure that's not what President Trump means, but that would be obviously a massive step if it came to that, to push the Chinese to do more.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point in going ahead with sanctions against North Korea unless the Chinese are involved.
No, there absolutely isn't. They'll have a Security Council resolution being considered on Monday, I believe, and I think we'll have to see what's in the wording of that. China is a permanent member of the Security Council, and so they will have to come on board, but they may want concessions in return. They're very concerned about Trump's relationship with South Korea, with Japan, and so let's not forget that relationship is not just a military relationship. Trump's actually muddling the waters. He's threatening to pull out of the South Korea-U.S. trade deal as well, which, of course, means that security and trade are now intricately linked.
Yeah, I mean, Agathe, this is the point that Linda's just made. I mean, Trump, he can't be serious about cutting off business with countries that do business with North Korea, can he?
No, that's not a credible threat. And I think that's the problem with Trump tweeting, is that he's making threats that he cannot deliver. So there are several options that the U.S. can go for. Through the UN, more sanctions, and maybe going for oil. Like on the last sanctions in August 25th, they went for iron, for coal, but this time they could go for oil. But you still need to have China's support. China is a member, as you said, is a member of the UN and is bound by the same sanctions. The problem is enforcement. You can agree to the sanctions. If you don't enforce them, that's the issue.
Is there a case for saying Trump actually quite likes this? He wouldn't mind a pretext for putting up trade barriers against China. I mean, after all, that was what he won the US election on.
It's true, but in that case, it would inflict so much damage on the US economy that would be nonsensical to go for that. They could also go for the financial route and try to target companies or banks, Chinese banks or Russian banks, that are having business with North Korean companies. But even that route is a little bit sensitive because it could backfire. Some of these Chinese banks are very large and they have links with US companies as well.
Right. Do you think China can be relied on to uphold any sanctions that are, assuming the UN Security Council goes for it? Will China actually uphold them? Can we trust them to?
I think they would if they agreed with the sanctions, and that's the big if. I think they have upheld previous sanctions, but in terms of scale, obviously, it hasn't done enough to deter North Korea. And I think one of the issues with China and North Korea is that North Korea does have a slight habit of provoking other countries, getting something in return. You recall a few years ago, they would get some aid in return if they stopped their nuclear testing. Apparently, they didn't. So I would actually say for China, it's a huge headache because they have this unreliable state on its borders that if major sanctions were levied on North Korea, it could cause an exodus over Chinese borders, or worse, conflict breaks out in the Korean Peninsula, and the biggest land border between North Korea is with China, not even with South Korea.
Do you get a sense that Kim is trying to provoke China? I mean, this latest test has come just as Xi Jinping is welcoming people to the latest BRICS conference in Beijing.
Yeah, I know. It's not... before I answer that, I'm not quite sure I know how strategic the North Koreans are. Maybe you do.
They are very strategic. Yeah, they know what they're doing.
There's method in this madness.
That's the thing. Like we portray them as crazy as mad, but they're actually very rational. They're pursuing their interest very well.
Yes, in that case, my assumption going into it is that the BRICS summit is obviously China's way of showing they are the leader of emerging markets. Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa are there. there. And if North Korea is being strategic, then what they're probably trying to do is to get China's attention, because I don't think Xi Jinping, he has a lot on his mind. He's got a leadership renewal, 5-year renewal coming up next month. North Korea is not high on his agenda, and he does need, I think, in many ways, for China to essentially reiterate the status quo. If that at least stops the United States somewhat, pushes back a bit. Otherwise, the U.S. Is absolutely taking the lead on what's happening to North Korea. But in the past, it's always been the six-party talks, which involve China, Russia, South Korea, Japan, and the U.S. that's made the most progress on North Korea, small as it is.
What did you make of Linda's point, though, about turning off the oil supply? I mean, that's going to create a refugee crisis, essentially, isn't it?
I was going to rebound on the point of the U.S. taking leadership. I don't think, actually, the U.S. is taking leadership. They're maybe doing it, but in a very disorderly way. There's no, coherent strategy. The ones who are taking leadership are the North Koreans. They know what they want. They have an agenda. They're making progress. But I agree with you on China not wanting to destabilize North Korea. So they will have the party congress in fall. They're not going to risk anything. What they want is to maintain stability. So they're going to find a way to, strike a compromise.
All right, Agathe L'Homme, then to you. Good to see you both. Thanks for joining me.